think we're all here, so we might as well make a start, if that's okay, folks. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Adults and Health Committee on Tuesday, the 30th of June 2026. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Please, though, turn mobile phones to silent or vibrate. This meeting will be live streamed and a recording of the meeting will be available later on the County Council's website. I will adjourn for a short comfort break if the meeting lasts more than 2 hours. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave via the side doors and use the fire escape next to the kitchen. The assembly point is in the car park. Let's move on to item 1, which is changes to committee membership. Councillor Colin Galbraith was appointed as a member of the committee on the 21st of May 2026, replacing former Councillor Osborne. Councillor Robin Wyatt, welcome Robin, was appointed as a member of the committee on the 10th of June 2026, replacing Councillor Tom Hawker-Dawson, and Councillor Daniel Devine was appointed a substitute member of the committee on the 21st of May 2026, and welcome Daniel. We should also note for the record that on the 19th of May, Council was pleased to reappoint me, Councillor Graham Wilson, as the Chair of the Adults and Health Committee for 2026, and to reappoint Councillor Lewis Navarro as Vice Chair. That's the changes to committee membership. If we move on to apologies for absence, will the Democratic Services Officer let us know of any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Galbraith, who is substituted by Councillor Devine.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No. The next item is item 4, is the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of March 2026 and the minutes action logs, which are on pages 5 to 18 of the agenda document pack. We're being asked to approve the minutes as an accurate record. The public minutes are included in the published meeting papers, and the confidential minutes have been circulated electronically to committee members for review. If anybody objects to either the public or confidential minutes, can you indicate that now? I see no objections, so we'll take those as approved and I'll sign them in due course. We turn next to the minutes action log. Are there any questions on the action log? And we have one from Councillor Howitt.
You have advance notice of this, so I'll do it very quickly. It's been, I've had a chance at this committee to say on more than one occasion that we would like the paper on insourcing to be restored to the agenda plan. And I know that you've deliberated carefully on it, and I believe that you're going to announce a decision. I hope it will be a positive one.
And thank you for the email, Richard, which I'm very grateful to receive advance notice of this. Everybody will have seen that in today's papers, there is reference to the Home and Community Support Services, and that does include specific reference to an option of bringing some or all of the services in-house. So that element is included in there. In the October meeting, there is a specific paper on capital development, and that will include opportunities for us to debate whether or not it's appropriate for other services to be brought in-house that are not currently being determined in-house. So I wasn't proposing to have a specific paper on whether or not we should bring things in-house or not, but we will ensure that any time where there's an opportunity to go out to the market for services, we do include within the papers something specific about the option for insourcing. Richard.
I don't think we want a long debate on this today, but for the record, a specific paper on all of the service areas and then which might be considered for insourcing was what was on the agenda plan. It was taken off by officers and isn't covered by what you've just said. If you respectfully disagree with what I'm putting, I respect that, but I would ask that my objection is noted in the minutes because I don't agree with that decision.
Okay, I hear what you say, and I'm happy to take your objection, and we can note that. Does anybody else wish to comment on the action note? I had a question on page 15. We were promised from the February meeting a briefing paper which hasn't, as far as I'm aware, yet come. And I mentioned that to Patrick just a moment ago, and he's checking up to see where it's got to. So that is still in progress and is something which we need to continue to keep on our radar. If there's nothing else, I think we'll move on to the next item. So the next item is about the retender of home and community support packages services, which can be found on pages 19 to 58 of the agenda document pack. Now, I was about to say, yeah, we are joined in this item by Chris Bush, the Service Director for Strategy and Commissioning, Shauna Torrance, the the Head of Adult Social Care Commissioning, and Joe Melvin, the Strategic Lead. Would you care to join us all at the presenters table and just outline briefly the contents of the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. Very nice to see you all again. So the paper that we're introducing today, which, as the Chair has just outlined, is found on page 19 of the agenda pack, asks committee to approve the procurement of new home and community care framework for the provision of domiciliary care and support services, predominantly but not exclusively to ensure that the council can continue to meet its statutory responsibilities in this area as set out in the Care Act of 2014. It proposes a new compliant 10-year arrangement with an initial term of 3 years, and this will replace the current arrangements that expire in 2027 with a mobilisation date following procurement currently planned for the 1st of April of that same year. The estimated value of the new contract is approximately £773 million over its lifetime, though it should be noted, as I always do, as with all frameworks, it doesn't explicitly commit the council to any level of spend. We pay for what we use and not what we don't. And this is outlined in some detail in section 3.8 of the report. The delivery model that the paper proposes has emerged from what is a substantial period of planning that began as far back as 2024. It included, not exhaustively, extensive collaboration with providers, people who use the services, and staff from multiple council teams. There were market testing exercises that were completed. Several provider engagement events were held to involve current and potential providers in helping us to shape the new model. Alongside that, extensive research was undertaken with councils across the country to understand their home care models and insights gained from their experiences. And we worked alongside colleagues within NHS work streams on frailty, place and integrated neighbourhoods to ensure that anything that we were proposing to put in place was aligned with not only current models, but any future models that may emerge through work in those spaces. And finally, we also engaged some independent consultancy that supported us with the development of the pricing, schedules and models, as well as the procurement approaches that we could take to do so. The extensive findings of this work are summarised in sections 3.3 and 3.4 of the main report. This has resulted in what we believe to be an innovative and place-based model consisting of 15 zones. And I won't go into great detail here, committee will be pleased to hear, but this is described in some detail in section 3.5 of the report. The model is recommended following the consideration and discounting of various alternative options as described in section 4 of the document. And this includes our reasons for not recommending each of the options that we've chosen not to do so, with the rationale for our recommendation set out quite clearly in section 5. Sections 3.10 and 3.11 set out the approach to the procurement that will be adopted and the timeline upon which we anticipate this procurement will run. And finally, and as I hope you would expect, careful consideration has been given to the implications for LGR. And again, this is outlined in section 3.13 of the report. That is an extremely brief summary of what is a very complex and detailed document, which in turn is the product of what I hope the committee will agree is an extensive and diligent period of planning and setting this out through the report. And with that complexity in mind, I will pause there and invite questions, for which I'm extremely grateful to be joined by Shauna and Joe to be able to help us to field. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Can I open it up to questions? If not, I will go on, Darren.
Thank you. So yeah, 2.8 care micro enterprises, which I think are a really sort of promising area for adult social care. I was really happy to read that so 2.8 paragraph suggests that care micro enterprises could meet 5% of the council's home care need, but then I noticed could. So I just wonder, is there any sort of indication of how much they meet at the moment and what stands in the way of getting to this 5% level? And I also just wondered whether our sort of care micro enterprises have sort of clusters in any one of the various areas that are listed later, or whether they're kind of distributed throughout the county.
Thank you, Councillor Green. And this is one of those moments where I'm extremely pleased to be joined by Shauna and Joe, who will be able to answer your question far better than I.
Thank you. In terms of the 5%, that is a kind of working model that we developed based on the fact that the care micro enterprise is very much a kind of developing market that we put into place as part of our Care Together programme. I think we have more than 80 CMEs now operating since the time this was initially drafted. Numbers probably looking upwards more towards 100. We have a smaller number that have opted to work and go onto our CME trusted provider list, which is a huge step forward in terms of arranged care provision. So that means those care micro enterprises are actually able to provide arranged care on behalf of the council. 5% is not the limit. It was a kind of what we thought was a sensible estimate. And as we continue to develop care micro enterprises and they are able to deliver at scale, it may be that that percentage can be higher. But recognising that care micro enterprises in themselves, in terms of our definition, can't have more than 10 members of staff, the potential scale that they would be able to deliver is somewhat limited. But we do have a really good distribution of care micro enterprises across the whole of the county and supporting a wide range of both self-funded clients and also council arranged clients as well.
Thank you. I mean, I thought 5% was actually excellent. If we get to that, I think that's fantastic. They're never going to be much more than that because of the nature of what they are. But yeah, thank you very much.
Richard.
First of all, to say there's a lot that's good in this report, and I want to strongly welcome the move to a place-based approach. The fact that this is very much rooted in the prevention strategy, and I really like the parts about thinking about and caring about sponsor licenses to try and ensure that international workers are not disadvantaged. So I think there's a lot in this that I want to very strongly praise. The questions, and there are a few, in the report it says there's been, under the current scheme, a reduction of the number of providers in the last 6 months, but it doesn't explain why and what's going on there. Secondly, place-based, great, but it's not clear to me whether the 15 zones that have been identified are contiguous with the integrated neighbourhoods being adopted by health. Are they? And if not, why not? I'm not up to date on the situation of micro-enterprises in the Care Together programme, which I've strongly supported, of course. But last I heard, we couldn't refer to them because they're too small to be eligible for CQC inspections, and that was a real problem. What it looks like is that this user choice exemption is a new thing that's happening that is enabling us to refer to them. I'm hoping that is going to be the answer. So could you explain what that means? And hopefully that's a big improvement that you're able to explain. I would just comment on 3.4.1. One of the aims is fewer providers. I do have real mixed feelings about that. I understand that it's difficult to manage too many different diverse providers and then we're not ensuring safety. I do understand that argument. And I think that is something that officers are concerned about and which I do acknowledge. But in terms of localism and diversity and supporting micro-enterprises, that's about having more, not less. And what we don't want is to have a small number of big contracts with big national providers that aren't locally sensitive. And so I worry about that. I do worry about that. And so I will just put that on the discussion. And then this I really didn't understand. You say in the report, the market isn't ready for the quality requirements in the contract until year 2. So the decisions on price are only in year 1 and quality will come in from year 2. I find that difficult to understand because surely a lot of decisions will be taken in year 1. And if they're taken without reference to quality, that appears to be very, very worrying. And the fact that the market isn't ready to have quality requirements in the contracts and contract decision making, that seems strange and maybe I've misunderstood it and you're able to put that right, but that does seem strange in the report. But overall, as I say, I think this is clearly a big body of work has been undone in order to get it to this stage. I really like the co-production elements as well, and that there's a lot in this to welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. And are you able to answer those various questions? And then, Anna, was that related to? We'll just pick up Anna's comment first.
My question was related. Sorry, my question was related to a similar thing to Councillor Howarth's, and it's: are we checking that these care might? You said the numbers of them are increasing, and I wondered why. Why is that? Not that it's a bad thing, but are we checking that these are not just big providers badging themselves, splitting themselves up and badging themselves as micro enterprises?
That's a good point. So, Jo.
Okay, so I'll just start with the question about the number of the reduction in provider numbers that we'd seen in the previous months. That I think is in part to do with the market dynamics and the market forces that are at play. One of the issues that we have identified through our review in terms of the current system of a dynamic purchasing system is that you have a large number of providers that are currently registered, which is about 100, all bidding for work at the same time against each other. And when supply in the market is very, very good, that makes competition in the market quite strong and sometimes can create a dynamic whereby providers are bidding for packages and they're not getting them. And so what we sort of see as a result of that is that some of the providers then will look to focus work elsewhere because they're bidding for packages and not getting them. So that kind of is potentially part of that trend where we have had a big sort of swell, if you like, in supply and coverage and provision. Moving on to your second question in terms of the zones, the zones are developed to be very closely aligned to the integrated neighbourhoods. They are not exactly aligned because some of the challenges we had around designating the boundaries, and we have focused the zones based on being linked to district boundaries in order that come LGR they are more easily disaggregatable. But they are very closely aligned to the integrated neighbourhoods, and very much the emphasis in the specification and the requirements will be that those zoned-based providers are embedded and work closely with the primary care networks in those integrated neighbourhoods. In terms of the third question around the CME and the trusted provider list, yes, your understanding is absolutely right, that the new Procurement Act has actually given us a channel to be able to allow people who wish to have their care arranged by the local authority using a service user exemption, which is a particular type of arrangement under the Procurement Act, and that has allowed us to be able to progress that further. And I think just to answer the other councillor's question, that is the trusted provider list has an additional level of due diligence and requirement from the local authority that our contracts teams check to ensure that those providers not just meet the relevant CQC criteria, but also all of our additional criteria and quality standards that we expect from our providers. So there's an even stronger level of due diligence and oversight of those providers. And we have very, very strict parameters about which organisations are able to be classed as a care micro-enterprise in Cambridgeshire. And so those that have, they can not have more than 10 members of staff. Once they hit above that threshold, they're no longer allowed to remain on our trusted provider list. And the numbers have been growing because of the work we've done to try and develop this as a market. And we've been particularly successful in attracting a number of new people to want to join the care workforce in terms of being able to work independently for themselves or as part of a very small local business. Question number 4 in terms of fewer providers. Yes, thanks.
Can you hear me okay? So 3.4.1 refers to the ambition to work with a fewer number of providers but create a stronger partnership approach in doing that. And that partly links to Joe's answer to question 1, in that we've seen a swell in the market that almost outstrips demand from the council, and by reducing the number of providers we've got, we're able to robustly meet demand, ensure those providers remain sustainable so that we don't see a turnover in providers within our market. People receive more consistency in care, but we can also work really closely with those providers on new models of care, innovation, and different ways of doing things that will improve outcomes for people as we work our way through the contract. We don't envisage a very small number. We've set the number per zone to enable a range of providers to operate within those zones. So there will be a few larger organisations, but it also leaves room for the smaller SMEs to operate within those zones as well, which gives us a real mix and range of choice for local people.
Thank you. And in terms of the question 5 around quality, just to be clear, the quality requirements within the proposed framework are increased from the current framework. So we have a requirement around good or outstanding CQC, even to get through the first stage of the procurement. All of those quality metrics and performance indicators will be applicable from year 1. what we are proposing to introduce from year 2 only is the performance enhancement or clawback mechanism associated with the 4 key performance indicators that matter most to people with lived experience. So they relate to things like the consistency of the care team, enhanced performance requirements around things like late calls or missed calls. We're proposing to introduce those from year 2 in order to give the market the chance to transition into the new arrangements, to give the providers time to kind of onboard, train all of the staff, because we don't want to penalise people or providers during that transition phase. But from year 2, we fully expect that those additional KPIs will be adhered to and, if necessary, followed against those providers.
Go on, Richard, and then I wanted to follow that up as well.
I won't come back at length. I probably need to still be persuaded on the last point, but the point that really jumped out is this issue about contiguity. I find it strange that we're contiguous with district boundaries for districts that are not going to be there in a year or 2, and the integrated neighbourhood boundaries exist and we're cooperating with them, but we're not fully aligning with them. I don't think that probably is right. But rather than say, oh, let's spend a long time resolving that today, could I just ask you, Chair, and the Vice Chair to discuss that with officers afterwards?
Okay. I think the 15, I'll come back to Steve in a minute. I think the 15 zones, or whatever the good term is, are do relate back to the district boundaries, and all the options which government is considering, bar the one that Peterborough City put forward, which splits Huntingdonshire, does follow the district boundaries. So it should be that this can be picked up by the new unitary authorities in the future, but that is something which we do need to bear in mind. Can I just ask my question, Steve, and then come back? Just picking up on what you were saying about the quality in the first year. So and I'm looking at page 22, paragraph 2.6. It says 25 of our existing, admittedly, registered DPS providers are awaiting CQC inspection. Of those that do have a CQC rating, 85% are rated good or outstanding, which is good. 12% though are rated as requires improvement, and 4% are inadequate. So does that mean that we will not be allocating any either existing or new work to them in the future? And sorry, and Lewis is going to follow that up as well.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Steve. Yes, follow on that one. So and based on those percentages that the Chair just mentioned, how does that work with the quality threshold that we initially are staging for procurement process, for the procurement stage? So if the first allocation is, are we running the risk that is price driven, that providers go very aggressive on price, but then in order to secure share in the market? Have we tested that? Have we envisioned that? And how do we solve that?
So it does mean that any of the current providers or providers in the market that are currently unrated, requires improvement or inadequate, will in theory not pass the first stage of the criteria, which is called the PSQ, and that will run from the summer through till I think it's September time. So that those providers would be potentially implicated, yes. In terms of quality, threshold and price, we did run a market simulation whereby we made sure that there would be sufficient numbers of currently eligible providers who met our CQC requirements that would be eligible to get through the first and second stage of the procurement. And so we're confident that there is enough supply within the market that meet that quality threshold. And just to give you an indication of that, like I say, we currently have 100 registered providers on our DPS at the moment. And the last time we explored with the market opening our DPS, we had a further 125 providers try to join. So there was a huge market interest that just made it very, very challenging for us in terms of provider numbers. I suppose there is obviously a risk around pricing, but we are mitigating that through the use of council set floor and ceiling, which those rates are based on the in-depth modelling that we've done with the external consultancy support to ensure that those rates are sustainable, because that's exactly the risk that we wanted to avoid, which is that providers go aggressively and price aggressively in order to attain, they come below that pricing level, and then subsequently further down the line we have issues around sustainability.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, probably just worth, there's a lot, this is complex and it's at times a bit difficult to get one's head around, but I think a couple of points I'd probably like to reiterate rather than introduce any new things. Just think, firstly, the quality standards from which we begin at the very outset are higher than the ones that we currently have got in place as things stand today. So there is immediately an increase in the quality expectations that are there. What Joe has already described, I thought very well, was that we're looking to step that up in 2 stages. So from day one, it will be of higher quality. Those expectations are higher from the outset. And then at the conclusion of year 1, as we run into year 2, once the transition is concluded, there is then a further increase in the expectation of quality that goes along with it. So it's an incremental 2-stage process, but we will absolutely have a higher quality expectation from the outset. I think on the point of there is always that risk, and we've just touched on it, where pricing can be a decisive factor. You can see parts of the market, quote, potentially lower prices, but as a way to gain an advantage through a tendering process. The kind of offset to that, and Joe's just described some of it, is that we understand quite clearly as a council and as a team of commissioners what it costs to deliver high quality provision of this type in the county. And we understand what that looks like, and therefore we have a set range of parameters that allow us to understand when a price that's coming in is too low, and the tendering mechanisms allow us to challenge that during the tendering process. So we don't simply have to accept it and go, that's a really low price, therefore you get a really good score. We wish there was something we could do about that. We actually have mechanisms built into it to identify prices that are quoted and rates that are quoted that fall outside of the expected parameters as we understand them, and subsequently challenge them through the process, because sometimes that can be as a result of an attempt to subvert or game this process. But sometimes it can simply be as a result of the fact that tendering documentation and pricing schedule submissions as part of tenders like this are really complicated, and sometimes providers simply put the wrong figures in the wrong boxes sometimes, and it does happen. So that mechanism is there both as a protection for us as the commissioning local authority, but equally as a protection for providers that are bidding to be part of this framework, where genuine and honest mistakes are made as part of that complicated tendering process. And I thought it's probably helpful and worthwhile to just kind of reiterate and clarify that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions. I'd like to ask the first one, then I may not need to ask the second one. So the first one is, of the providers who qualify for our quality providers list, how much do they tell you they value the fact that they've qualified? How important is it to them? Do they find it very useful? What feedback are you getting from them, please?
Sorry, just to clarify, when we say when providers are qualifying, do you mean through the procurement stage?
You referred to a list of preferred providers or quality providers, those people that have gone to a higher standard, have met your better criteria. And I wonder how much they value that qualification, what they're telling you about it.
So in respect to the trusted provider list, which, yeah, sorry, I'm with you now. It's quite early days for us. I think we've been running probably for about 6 to 9 months, and over that time frame we've been gradually increasing those numbers of providers at a time. So I think we probably have somewhere between 10 to 20 providers on there. My understanding is that for them it has provided a way for them to expand their market into providing to the local authority. But I think actually it would be a really interesting piece of feedback to gain from that section of the market, because obviously there is quite a lot of additional due diligence for those providers that choose to come and supply to us, rather than if they were to stay working independently with people who self-fund. And I think there is always an important balance to be had in terms of maintaining the right level of quality and oversight at the same time as not making it so challenging for them that it's potentially off-putting. So if it's something that's acceptable, I think that would be a good question to potentially bring back as an update.
Thank you. Yeah, trusted provider list. That's exactly the one. I waited quite a while to ask my question, and the actual name of the list had slipped from my mind. So thank you for that. So I think that they probably will value it quite a lot. When a council says that you're a trusted provider, I think that has a lot of value in the market. And so it leads on to my second question, which is, you said if they're at 10 and they go to 11 staff members, they no longer qualify. And I guess what I'm concerned about is that you could have a fantastic provider doing everything right, which is really, really, really cooking on gas, you know, really doing well. And then you get to this point where they've got 10 and they might want to have an 11th staff member, but they're terrified because they'll lose this valued title that they've got. And I just wonder if you've thought about that and how you plan to counter it, or what you'll do about it.
Excellent question. So a couple of things, and if I may, if it's okay, Councillor Tierney, just to go back to the previous question just for a moment. I think there's the piece about the trusted providers list, which is kind of specific to Care Micro Enterprises, which we'll come back to your question on that in a moment. But there is then also the piece about the wider framework and home care providers of this type of provision accessing that framework, both in terms of the degree of certainty that it provides them about revenue streams and the access to essentially revenue opportunities that provides, that allows them to, with a greater degree of confidence, invest in their business and develop their business as they're moving along. There's the second piece about the kind of status that comes with that. It is you've passed and met a certain quality threshold that we believe is high, and being able to say that is a key selling point for any provider, as well as we know, many of our residents look to us as a council. They trust us as a council, and they take confidence in the quality assurance and the rigor that we're bringing to bear on these on our provider market, and they see that as a sign of our confidence in them. It builds trust in those people that may wish to use it. So there's a number of benefits, and that's also complemented by the fact that whilst I'm sure providers don't always see this as a benefit, we are diligent in our ongoing quality assurance of those providers, which at times means we are testing them and holding them to account. But equally, when, as can be the case at times, things do go wrong, organisations can always have wobbles. They have the support of us as a local authority, and we work very closely with our providers in times of difficulty as well to support them through those difficult periods. So I think that I genuinely believe there are some quite significant benefits for providers. With the kind of 10 going on to 11 piece, it's not a case that recruiting an 11th person means you are suddenly not part of this framework. What it simply means is that you're no longer designated as a Care Micro Enterprise. as part of one of the group types of provider on the framework. So if you are part of this endeavour and successfully attached to this new home care framework when it's up and running as a Care Micro enterprise, if you suddenly appointed an 11th member of staff, you would remain on our framework. It would just be handled slightly differently because your designation changes rather than your eligibility to be part of the gang moving away.
Thank you. David.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, and really builds on the point you made about moving into LGR. The 15 zones and the district layout makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we're trying to future-proof this as much as possible. One thing I just want to clarify is, as the Chair mentioned, there's only one option, option D, that splits a district council up. And looking at the 4 zones in Huntingdonshire, they don't, to my remembrance, match the split that was in the proposal from Peterborough. So we'd actually have to rezone, or you'd have to split zones. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in terms of option D, if that was the outcome, or indeed a different version that potentially came forward, we would look to realign the zones using postcode data. And that's the contingency plan that we've developed in the background for the likelihood of option D. So irrespective of the outcome of LGR, all of the zones can be adapted and allocated around postcodes if needs be.
So I think we've had a good discussion. Chris, could you just remind us, it could run up to 10 years. And when I say it, that assumes that the county council continues, but each unitary could choose to have 2 + 3 + whatever, 3 + 2 as it chose. And how did you decide that three was the right initial amount to go for and 10 in total? And then we'll vote on the recommendation.
So thanks, Chair. So the overall length of the contract being 10 years as it is the maximum permissible under current law. So we decided that we would want to adopt that. And part of the rationale behind that, in the kind of the clearest one, is the certainty that gives to the provider market. We've got a provider market that is already grappling with instability, as we know, and is challenged in a number of different ways. And the more certainty that we are able to provide about our long-term commitment to that provider market, we believe is the better. However, we also recognise that things change, and that isn't specific to LGR, although LGR is clearly at the forefront of our mind. And so the initial 3-year term was a balance of, we are asking our providers in some cases here, or in many cases, to significantly change some of the ways that they're working, and that is going to require an investment from them, both in terms of skills and quality and configuration and localized delivery, and the list goes on. And therefore, for that investment, they would need an initial commitment from us of a minimum of 3 years for us essentially to for it to be worth their while. My words, not theirs. And we want to incentivize them to feel confident that they can invest in the changes in the business that we are asking them to work alongside to make. The second part around the 3 years is that gives us approximately 2 years after what would be vesting day as it's currently planned, which is a good 12-month period from that point for any inheriting unitary authority that emerges to evaluate the effectiveness of the thing that they've inherited. And we believe that 12 months is a very good period of time to be able to do that. And then subsequently allowing a further 12 months if they wished to depart from this framework agreement at the end of that current 3-year period, allowing enough time for them to re-procure an alternative moving forwards if they wish. So it gives that flexibility for a change of direction in future if necessary. I'm not in any way implying that I believe it will be necessary or that it should be necessary, but it leaves all options on the table. So we felt that was the correct balance between providing certainty to the market without making any long-term commitments on behalf of future unitary authorities that might emerge.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike. Last question.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Well, I wasn't clear. Are you going on to open it up for debate or?
I've sort of opened it up as we've
Yeah,
gone along.
I mean, that
but
was, sorry, I'm a bit
you
flagging
can
a bit
feel
late.
Free to, feel free to open up to
Yeah.
questions or debate, whichever you prefer.
I mean, there's probably a question in here, but it's not entirely questions. And I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is, yes, it's very positive the work that officers have done here, and certainly support the move to going more local and to local zones. And I think this is particularly important because we've got to imagine right down to what people are doing here. They're going from people's house to help them live in their homes, and there's a lot of travel in between. And the situation we have at the moment is lots of people are doing excessive travel, and care workers are crossing each other on the road, driving sizable numbers of miles because they work for different care companies and they're going to a completely different place. And this matters. I've got a good deal of experience from this, from enforcing national minimum wage, and I've inspected lots of domiciliary care workers a little while ago, and I'm not totally up to date for this. This is a little while ago, but care companies, often what they were doing was that the care worker gets into the old person's home and they're getting out of bed, phones in to say, I've clocked on, phones in again when they leave to say they've clocked off. Now, and a lot of care companies that I inspected were only paying for the time they worked in between those phone calls. And under national minimum wage, they are entitled to be paid for the time that they're driving between calls or not. And when I left HMRC, I was trying to develop a computer program that would allow us to crunch the enormous numbers which the computer that took these phone calls was juggling with to compute those wages and compare it with the actual hours that people had worked, including the travelling time in between calls, at minimum wage, because the slightly above minimum wage that they were getting for the time actually in people's homes would often be less than the minimum wage for the time, for the entire time they're working. And this could lead to substantial arrears. I don't know if that has been resolved yet, but I suspect there are risks that people could be thoroughly exploited under the system we have. The smaller the distances are, the easier it is to move away from such a system and to get this right. Yeah, I did wonder about the LGR. I mean, I have two contrary things I'm thinking about the timescale, because the first thing I'm thinking is far too often I'm wondering if the government made a mistake to introduce the LGR, because it wasn't in our manifesto after all, and it seems to be an excuse for any council that wants to do nothing to say this is why we're doing nothing, and to just roll forward things doing it the same way as they were. At the same time, I hope that we have in what we're doing here the flexibility for councils to respond to a government that might become much more dynamic than it has been in the last 2 years, and will actually make an absolute sea change in how council care or social care is done. Because what we have in front of us here does not fix a broken system, and we've got to accept that that's what we've got. We have a system where we have catastrophic events like those surrounded with the collapse of Beaumont or withdrawal of Beaumont care from our use. What happened with Ranius Care, where people were not having their catheters correctly fitted because staff were not trained properly by that company and they weren't employing enough staff to do the job. So under this, people will still be relying on companies whose main purpose is to make money, not serve the public. And you did say, Chair, that this was a moment where we might want to bring up insourcing rather than having it as a item on the agenda. And I would like to bring that up now. I'm on page 33 of our agenda. You can see that it does bring up insourcing at the top of page 33, and it just says, was considered as an option. It was discounted due to higher costs, complexity, capability to deliver within timescales, impact of LGR. Now, you could copy and paste that into everything we get at this council, and that is what frustrates me. We are not seriously looking at insourcing. And it is important. We have a contract here which is going to be worth 773 million if we're looking at page 29. It builds in a 5% profit margin. We're talking about £40 million of the council taxpayers' money going to private companies, and in some cases, as I've set out on a number of occasions at these meetings, this is going straight to the Cayman Islands. You know, it is not helping the care of people, and there is nothing in the proposals here that are setting out, which I would like to see, which would be that we would be preferring to insource as much as we can here, and we would prefer to use non-profit businesses rather than profit-making businesses. And we had a seminar, I think, recently, where we were talking about how you evaluated these contracts. And I was pushing on this, and I was told, well, if you insource something, you would have to put everybody in the local government pension scheme who was in there. And that's a really good pension scheme. And if you put them all in the local government pension scheme, they would automatically lose the contract, because that would cost more than it's possible to put in the contract and actually go through and bid for the scheme. And I'd just like us to consider how shocking this is. Our lack of value for our care workforce is such that if we were to give them a proper pension scheme and treat them like valued people, treat them as well as local government workers deserve to be treated, as civil servants and so on, if we were to treat them like people we valued, then that makes it impossible under the competitive regime. Our care workforce are not valued enough, and that is the whole problem. The whole social care issue is not valued enough. It is underfunded. It is given over for people to make profit from, and we desperately need a national care service like the NHS. I hope we will see a change of heart at the very top, and that we will find governments mandating us to do something much, much better than the totally unacceptable situation we have today. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Chris, do you wish to comment or on that?
Absolutely. And extremely valid points. I will remain guarded and apolitical in my views, but recognise many of the challenges, the wider challenges faced by the care market that Councillor Black has just extremely eloquently put across. And I think many of us would agree with the size and the scale of those challenges. I suppose, and it is challenging at times, given that we are required as officers to work within a certain set of parameters, and one of those parameters is ensuring best value, and that is not in any way to disagree with Councillor Black's observations, but simply to state the matter of fact that one of the tests that we as officers of the council, of any council, are required to meet is the best value test. And whatever we may think of that, it does draw into quite sharp relief the relative costs that we're required to weigh up. And I wouldn't want members of the committee or Councillor Black particularly to think that that was me directly disagreeing with his points, more an observation of some of the parameters that we've got to work within. However, it is also true that those cost differentials are real and legitimate, and we are bound to respond and adapt to those cost differentials, whatever we may think about them. There are other genuine, and I accept absolutely the comment about this is a complex and detailed conversation and debate, but B, set of thinking that's gone into and gone behind what is ostensibly a slightly long sentence, i.e. it's very, very heavily summarised. But I would like to reassure Councillor Black and the committee that that is a summary, and there is more detailed thinking that went behind that. But equally, it's not simply about the best value approach either. I mean, I think one of the things that we thought at some length about was what the kind of logistical challenges that would be around this, particularly at a time of LGR, and particularly at the potential TUPE implications, which would be nothing short of enormous in terms of the number of staff that, were we to go down that route, that this council would be taking to inherit on behalf of future councils at this particular point in time. And again, we are required, given our duty under the Care Act to maintain market sustainability, to have to think about the implications of that sudden exodus of workforce would have on the provider care market that's operating out there at the minute, that could find itself in a position of suddenly having no staff to operate providers privately. And that would be extremely destabilizing as well. And then I suppose the final observation, which is extremely briefly touched on in the report, I absolutely accept, is one of the other responsibilities that we are required to discharge under the Care Act is one of ensuring that we have a diverse market that provides people with choice. And that particular route could result in a scenario where that choice becomes severely limited, and potentially, given the potential, use the same word twice, for market instability, that could seriously limit that provider, that choice down to one. That is in no way to disagree with the observations that have been made. I think there's many sentiments in there that we all share about the state, the national position we find ourselves in, the duress that we know the social care market to be. But hopefully that's a helpful partial expansion on some of the points that have been made, and I'd be pleased to provide more a point that suits you, Chair.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that does answer most of Mike's comments. Just picking up what you were saying about choice, doesn't the opposite apply as well? That the fact that we haven't got an in-source option imply that there is no choice for somebody. They have to go with an outside provider, whether they want to or they don't. And would it not have made sense to have that option for some of the zones, if not all of the zones?
The primary challenge with that would be if we looked to in-source provision, we would have very little control over which aspects of that in-source, what aspects of that provision was in-sourced, i.e. the choice is in the hands of the person who's receiving that care. And once that becomes an option for people, there is always, and I am merely speculating here, this is a hypothetical kind of thing that might happen, there's always the choice that everybody makes that choice. At the point that everybody makes that choice, those care packages move with them, and TUPE implications become, we are legally bound to adhere to TUPE regulations. At that point, we would be looking at TUPEing in the entire domiciliary care market operating in Cambridgeshire at that point in time. And we would undermine the provider care market if that were to happen. What I have described, just to be absolutely clear, is one potential outcome of that approach, but I think and other outcomes are available, I freely acknowledge, but we have to consider all outcomes as being possible when pursuing a particular route, and we have to mitigate against those, as all of them, as much as we can. I was not intending to pick the worst case example to illustrate my point, but simply to outline the potential extremes of the consequences of going down a particular route.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to very gently push back against Councillor Black. He made a point about LGR, and he said councils in some places are using that as an excuse to not do anything. Maybe that's a bit true in some places, but the problem is when the government tells you they're closing everybody down, you get to this very difficult situation where you have to decide how to proceed with the remaining business until the doors close. And I think a lot of councils are trying to do the best they can for their residents and their vulnerable people. Of course, they should until they close. But to introduce something brand new could be throwing a lot of expense and money at a thing that a new council will simply do away with. And to me, you have got to look for the balance there. If you just throw, you could have the best ideas in the world, but if the new council doesn't like them, they're done, aren't they? And increasingly, it's going to get harder to recruit staff, and a lot of our staff are also, of course, they're looking at their own job futures. You would expect them to, and it's going to make it harder and harder to deliver large new projects. So I guess my advice would be try to do the things we already do the best we can, but try to stay away from massive new changes, because they could go nowhere. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Right, I think we've probably given this a good airing. If we move to the report recommendations, I'm not intending to read them out in total, but The first one was approving the procurement of a new home care framework for a up to 10-year term at a total cost of a maximum of £773.4 million. The second item was to delegate authority for awarding and executing the framework, including the relevant extension periods, to the Executive Director, Patrick, in conjunction with me and Lewis. And the third item was to delegate authority for the award of call-off contracts in line with the delegated authorities matrix available in the contract procedure rules. Are we all in favour of that? I haven't heard anybody. Yeah, yes, everybody. I think that's unanimous. Thank you, Rishinda. So we move on to item 7, which is thank you, Joe, Shauna, and Chris. We move on to item 7, which is section 12, doctor procurement, which is on pages 59 to 64 of the agenda pack. The report will be introduced by Akua Ajipong, Service Director for Adult Social Care, and Lee Taylor, the Head of Service. Welcome. When you're ready, if you care to introduce it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Akua Ajipong. I'm Service Director for Adults Health and Commissioning South of the county. So I'm going to ask Lee to present the detail of the report, but just in summary, it sets out the proposed framework to allow officers at Cambridgeshire County Council to procure Section 12 doctors so that the local authority is able to meet its statutory obligations under the Mental Capacity Act 2005, specifically in relation to the deprivation of liberty safeguards. We're the supervisory body for this work, and we must ensure lawful and timely completion of all DOLS assessments. And that includes working with Section 12 mental health doctors to complete the mental health assessments. This needs to be undertaken by suitably qualified doctors, which is why we work alongside them. As such, the following recommendations are made to this committee. We ask that you approve the undertaking of a procurement process for Section 12 doctors on a 3-year contract valued at approximately £810,000. And we also ask that you delegate authority for awarding and executing this contract for the provision of Section 12 doctors starting in September 2026 to the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee. I'll ask Lee to share the detail of the report with you.
Thank you, Chair. So as Akua has outlined, the paper seeks approval for the procurement of the Section 12 approved doctors to support the delivery of our statutory duties under the Mental Health Act and the deprivation of liberty safeguards. The contract is for 3 years with a total value of £810,000, which works out approximately £270,000 a year. Budget provision has already been agreed through business planning, and a longer term contract is proposed to secure value for money and market sustainability. The Council, as a supervisory body, is legally required to ensure all deprivation of liberty safeguards known as DOLS assessments are completed lawfully and on time, including the mental health assessment, which is undertaken by a Section 12 doctor. Historically, this element was funded by the Integrated Care Board. This is not within their statutory remit to do so, and the legal advice confirms that full financial responsibility does sit with us as the local authority. The procurement process will follow a provider selection regime known as PSR, competitive process, which is the appropriate route given the specialist nature of the service that we require. As this is a healthcare procurement, it falls under the PSR route. The PSR applies to healthcare contracts and is designed to ensure the right providers are selected while enabling more streamlined procurement of existing services where appropriate. As a Section 12 doctor contract will be new to the local authority and a direct award route is not available, a full competitive tender process under the PSR route will be required. The PSR requires bids to be assessed against 5 statutory objectives, which is around quality, value, integration, improving access, and social value. These requirements can be met through proportionate pass-fail questions, which is the recommendation of the procurement lead who will be supporting us for this process, given the nature of the market and the need to minimise the burden on clinicians. The outcome of the procurement will be a framework agreement through which suitably qualified Section 12 doctors can be onboarded to undertake the dole's work. The intention is to appoint as many eligible doctors as possible using pass-fail criteria to ensure compliance and professional suitability. Without this provision, the Council would risk unlawful deprivation of liberty, legal challenge, delays in safeguarding and care decisions. This proposed contract will include flexibility to adapt to changes in demand and local government reorganisation. The recent Supreme Court judgment, which was delivered early this month, June 2026, is likely to reduce the number of doles cases requiring formal authorisation due to the legal standard for which could be considered a deprivation having now changed. This may reduce further demand and costs, but detailed modelling is not yet available, and we are awaiting further guidance from the Department of Health and Social Care and ADAS to support us with this. Securing timely access to Section 12 assessments ensures residents receive least restrictive and lawful care. Delays are avoided and the Council meets its equality duties and protects individual rights. In summary, this is about ensuring we remain legally compliant, protect residents' rights and maintain a suitable and robust system for delivering our statutory doles responsibilities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I'll open it up to questions and debate and all sorts at the same time. Oh, I've got lots of hands this time. So Christine was first, and then Richard, and then Sarah and Anna.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions here. Obviously, have we challenged the ICB's withdrawal, particularly where delays may create statutory and safeguarding pressures? That's the first question. How many are actually on the backlog? How many have we got on the backlog at the moment? From my personal point of view, I had to put not this authority, but another authority. I had to, every year I've had to apply for a dole's application for a relative, and it has taken absolutely months and months to do. And I'm saying it's not this authority, but it's another authority. And I'm wondering how many people are being put at risk because of that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Kurt, do you want to, or Lee, do you want to take those questions first, and then
I
we'll
think
move?
we'll do a joint answer. I can see Lee's quickly looking for the performance data as well. But in terms of speaking to the ICB and working with the ICB, yes, we have. The reality is that the ICB should never have been paying for it. So it's actually our legal obligation to pay for the Section 12. So it's right that we pick it up at this stage. I'm sure you'll be aware that there have been masses of changes in our local ICB, and I think as part of that there's been a bit of a review in terms of what they are and are not paying for, and this has become one of the areas that clearly we have responsibilities for. So we are picking up our responsibilities as required by legislation. In relation to the backlog, there's a few things I want to say. Firstly, I'm really sorry that you had that experience, even though it's not a Cambridgeshire County Council experience that you've had. I think it's something that's national in terms of people waiting for doles as well, and regardless of whether it's here or elsewhere, it's not a good experience.
Point out it's not this authority, it's another authority.
That's fine, thank you. But what I will say to that is that there's been a recent doles judgment that Lee mentioned as part of the paper, and the effect of that is that the standard to which the person's regarded as having a deprivation of liberty or experiencing a deprivation of liberty has shifted significantly. And so we know that many people historically who have fallen under this umbrella, there will be a shift as well. But fundamentally, we see this work as part of our ongoing safeguarding work as well. So it's very much linked to people's experiences as we draw up their care and support plans, really understanding what is the requirement, understanding the safety that needs to go there, ensuring that their rights are met as well. So we're working really closely with Fran's team, who are our practice standards team, to understand what does that look like, and who will still be regarded as having an ongoing deprivation of liberty under this new judgment. And that will shift. And so that will have a direct impact on people who are waiting for this assessment as well. So I'm going to just quickly pass over to Lee so that you get a sense of where our performance is at the moment in this kind of interim space that we're working in.
Brilliant, thank you for you, Chair. So we currently Supreme Court had around 1,300 individuals waiting for a DOLS assessment, and they are assessed on a high, medium, low criteria in terms of the risk level. Those who sit on a medium and low are assessed every 4 weeks through communications with the care homes. So we assess them, and they'll reprioritise as the risk indicators change. But at the moment, what we're looking at is the high indicators with the new Supreme Court judgment, and we absolutely see that actually those numbers will be reduced and potentially pending the guidance from the Department of Health and Social Care and ADAS. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So on that then, so if there's a shortage of Section 12 doctors, what triage process will protect the most vulnerable people first, please?
So our current numbers of Section 12 doctors within the county is 12 individuals. So we're actively working with them to support us to increase that number. Those 12 doctors are currently meeting kind of need at the moment, but absolutely they're a specialist doctor. So we need to work with them to understand how we can increase that number.
Thank you, Richard.
This is a sensitive area, and as was reflected in the last question, there is a backlog. I don't think it's worse in Cambridgeshire than it is in many authorities nationally, and my recollection is that it's been exacerbated by lack of clarity, let's say, at the national government level in the past, which has now been resolved and is enabling the service to address the backlog. If I've misunderstood that, I would be grateful for that to be explained. Obviously, we should do this. This is a statutory responsibility. We should agree it in about 2 seconds flat, actually. But the one thing that really riled me when I read this is that we're supposedly happy with the local health partners, and they were working together, and people are getting on together really well, and all of that. And yet they've done an exercise which is to pare to the bone anything that they think we should do rather than they do. And we're not as ruthless in return. And what I think is we should get our lawyers to look at anything we're doing that they should be doing, because they've essentially passed £1 million over 3 years from their budget to ours. And I don't find that happy, let's all hold hands with each other and work in warm partnership. I find that really cold-hearted, sharp-nosed, and I don't like it. And I think we're too nice as an authority. And if I was Patrick, I would be getting on the phone to our lawyers tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and trying to see what we can shift back onto them if that's the game that is going to be played.
Well, it'd be interesting. I did ask Patrick yesterday whether there wasn't anything that we should be getting them to pay for that we're currently doing in the same way that they passed over.
Chair.
And Patrick has assured me that there isn't. Now, he hasn't actually gone to the lawyers. Maybe that is the next step. That's a good idea. Would you like to react to that?
I think as a partner, we try to work as openly and supportive together. But your point is well made about this particular aspect of their point, which is often and has been, or as our experience with this particular ICB prior to it being formed into Central East, was very much driven by financial aspects. And so whilst I did say that yesterday, there is always our particular arrangements around continuing healthcare, which is a continued frustration of mine and many of the colleagues who are sat down at that other end of this room around the financial arrangements, when we should be thinking about the person, the patient, the resident of Cambridgeshire, and making sure that we've got the best care, both social and health care, for that person during what can be some of their most challenging periods of their lives. And unfortunately, what we end up doing is arguing about the money rather than about the care. Many councils have adopted legal positions on continuing healthcare, and I think it's something that we continue to consider of whether that's an option. It does just generate, it just doesn't help, it exacerbates poor relationships, I think, when you're going down the monetary route. But sometimes that's the position we may have to go in, and our considerations around continuing healthcare particularly, because that's a biggie for us, where we want to make sure that the right outcomes are being met for the person. So I think that's a particular line of inquiry that we will do, and we will consider the use of legal advice and specialist training that's available to our teams to help us around that particular aspect.
That was an excellent answer, and I'm proud this authority has an executive director who says putting the care first should be their aim as well as ours, and it is our aim. So there was a lot to really strongly commend in that answer, but I think it is right to review other actions we can take, and I am grateful for the assurances we've been given.
Thank you. Sarah and then Anna.
Okay, I wanted to focus a bit on the money side of things. And the Supreme Court judgment on the 6th of June obviously challenged the Cheshire West acid test and said that that should no longer be used. And obviously there's no modelling being done yet, but obviously that's going to have a massive impact on the number of people that are going to need to go through that. So I was just wondering, based on that, what underpinned the 1,500 assessments per year, and was that based pre this or post this, and where you're getting that figure from? We obviously, the modelling hasn't been done, but do you expect that to have substantial change? So do you think that the 800,000 that you're predicting is accurate, or do you think that that's going to significantly drop?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So the figures for the modelling of the 1,500 is from the previous 2 years. So when we were writing this paper, the judgment hadn't been delivered, and the paper was ready as the judgment came down, which is why we amended it slightly. So the second question in relation to the £810,000, what we are looking towards is around Christmas this year, we will have a sense of where we are going in terms of the direction of travel, but we think actually the application's probably going to be around this time next year, and we'll really understand what that looks like in our numbers, and we can start modelling that from there. But we do feel that there will be a savings against the £810,000 with the new judgment as well. Thank you.
Just to help and emphasize Lee's point to that question, I think at this moment in time, this paper was in process, and what we didn't want to do was either withdraw it or defer it, because it's important that we are still entitled and still need to procure the services of doctors under this particular part of the Act. So we wanted to bring it, but we also want to bring it with a caveat that we anticipate this will change and other processes will change. But what we also need to do is not think, oh, everything, we can just stop everything. We still have a legal obligation, as a query has already highlighted. And so there will be a balancing of responsibilities, work that we need to do to make sure that those people who do need support and who do have will have their liberty deprived is done in the safest and securest way. And those people who, because of their acid test changing, no longer are deprived of their liberty through this process, but we still need to make sure that their care and support is appropriate, that they're safeguarded, that they've got access to things that they need. So it's about how do we work that through as a directorate, but also as a council and as a system, because every council is going through this process, but we're all steadily finding our way, both with advice from DHSC, so the Department of Health and Social Care, from legal advisors, from practitioners, from Fran as our principal social worker, and our other colleagues internally were all advising us. So yeah, as Lee points out, we anticipate this number will change, but at this point, and particularly for this committee, we wanted to make sure that committee were cited and approval of this particular area of spend.
Thank you, Patrick. Anna.
Thank you. So I am looking at the same area, interestingly, paragraph 3.7 on page 61. Can I just point out there is an ambiguity here? It says committee is asked, and I apologise, I have not read the Supreme Court judgment of the 2nd of June, but it says the committee is asked to note a recent Supreme Court judgment on the application of DOLS, which is expected to reduce the number of cases requiring formal authorisation pending further national guidance. This is likely to reduce demand for Section 12 doctors and associated contract spend. My question is, does this mean there are 3 options here and they're all quite similar? So does this mean either fewer people are likely to be classified as needing to be deprived of their liberty in future, or the same number of people are likely to be deprived of their liberty in future, but with no doctor involvement, or more people might be deprived of their liberty anyway, but with also no doctor involvement? So I just wanted to know what is the meaning of that? What is the reason for the reduction in, because depriving people of their liberty is a really serious matter, and I don't want that to be done without doctor involvement, and I'm hoping that the council doesn't either.
Akura or Lee?
So the questions that you ask are some of the things that we are wrestling with at the moment. What I can say is that there won't be the same number of people who are considered deprived of their liberty, because the threshold for what that consideration has effectively gone up. So what we are looking at, and I think this is what we're waiting for the guidance from DHSC as well. And where we are thinking in terms of practice is recognizing that with or without DOLS, with or without MCA, we still operate in a context where people have human rights. And these rights exist beyond the MCA, beyond the CARE Act. So if people they may not meet the framework or the criteria under MCA, but if there is something going on there where any of their human rights are compromised, there is a practice imperative to mitigate the impact of that rights compromise, if you like, as well. So I think the assurance for this committee is that just because the acid test may have shifted, people's rights are still enshrined in other bits of legislation that we work with on a daily basis when delivering the CARE Act requirements. So that's the first point I'd like to make. We think that there will still be people who are under restrictions that are so extreme or so acute that we do need that judgment, we do need that assessment, we do need that involvement of doctors as well. So they will definitely continue to be involved in these scenarios as well. So I think that covers it. So there will be fewer people overall under this existing framework that we've worked with for many years. There may be some who no longer meet that threshold, but we are still working in the context of a rights-based society and legislative framework, both in terms of the CARE Act and wider bits of legislation. But there won't be more people than we currently have worked with historically under the previous legislative framework and and no doctor involvement. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And the key is that the threshold for removing people's liberty has gone up. In other words, I'm quite glad about that. I live quite close to a care home, and I'm very aware that there might be times when liberties do need to be restricted, but in principle, I'm not very happy with it. And if it's going to be done, I really definitely want a doctor to be involved. So that's what I was asking really about.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely where these things have to happen and it's sufficiently serious enough, there will definitely be the involvement still.
Patrick, you want to add a comment?
Just to add as well that there is under the Mental Health Act, there is also a requirement for Section 12 doctors. So this isn't just around deprivation of liberty. This is around Mental Health Act assessment and the need for somebody's care and treatment under that Act. I think the other thing, Chair, if I could, is we did a members development session which James Codlin led, which was about deprivation of liberty and capacity. And if members are supportive of it, we could certainly do something in light of the Supreme Court. Once we've got some clarity on that, we could certainly put another members development session on around deprivation of liberty in light of that, because I know in your divisions you will often get approached by members of the public asking specific questions, particularly as carers, around capacity and helping people to make decisions. And I know it was well received last time James did a training programme, so I'm more than happy to take that as an action if committee would like that.
Way back in my past, I've worked in research ethics, so I'm familiar with the Mental Capacity Act and the deprivation of liberty. But this local involvement here makes me realise just how very important it is that we are respecting people's rights and viewing that process of restricting people's liberties extremely seriously. And I'm glad to hear we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more questions, I think we'll move to the report recommendations. So the committee is being asked to approve the undertaking of a procurement process for a Section 12 approved doctors on a 3-year contract valued at £810,000. This follows withdrawal of ICB funding. And B, delegate authority for awarding and executing a contract for the provision of Section 12 doctors starting September 2026 to the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning in conjunction with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Adults and Health Committee. I've seen no objections, so can we take that as unanimous as well? Thank you very much. So we move on to the Integrated Community Equipment Section 75 agreement. Sorry, thank you, Lee and Akua. And welcome back. Hello again. So Diana and Shauna, you can to introduce the report on pages 65 to 70 of our document pack.
Thank you, Chair. The Integrated Community Equipment Service is an all-age service which manages the end-to-end process of provision of equipment across health and social care within Cambridgeshire. It is critical to helping people remain as independent as possible in their community, in their home of their choice, at school and as part of their end-of-life journey. The current service was put in place under urgency arrangements following a well-documented provider collapse, which was covered in an update to committee in October 25. The transition to the new service was managed effectively with minimal impact to services and people across the system. Whilst financial negotiations continue into this financial year due to the complexities of that contract and the transition, the service is now back to business as usual from a delivery perspective. This particular paper concerns the sealing of the Section 75 agreement, which underpins the funding arrangements across Cambridgeshire County Council, Peterborough City Council and the Integrated Care Board. The details of these funding arrangements have changed between 2021 and 2026 and have been included in sections 3.3 and 3.4 of the report. Pathfinder Legal Services have advised us that we need to provide further clarity on a previous decision taken within 2021, and that committee need to be made aware that this agreement is a tripartite agreement across the 3 organisations before sealing of the agreement can take place officially. We're therefore requesting committee formally confirm their approval for sealing the tripartite Section 75 agreement to allow us to action this. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana, did you want to add anything more at this stage? No. Any comments, questions? This is something which we've seen before, debated previously. So I suggest we move to the recommendations. So we are being asked to approve the council entering into and sealing the Integrated Community Equipment Service Section 75 agreement and confirm that this is a tripartite agreement. I'll take that as everybody in favour. Yep. Okay, thank you very much. We move on to the, thank you, Sean. Sorry, Dad. Sometimes you come and they'll ask all sorts of questions, and other times they won't come. They'll just say, yes, that's fine. It's obviously the paper was so clear, that was the thing. Right, the adult social care complaints policy, which can be found on pages 71 to 102 of the agenda document pack. This report will be introduced by Fran Marshall, the Service Director for Quality Assurance, Practice and Safeguarding. Full stop. Fran, would you care to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm seeking approval for the refreshed adult social care statutory complaints policy and delegation to approve future amendments or updates to the Executive Director for Adult Health and Commissioning. Adult social care statutory complaints are governed by the Local Authority Social Services and National Health Services Complaints England Regulations 2009. So these rules enforce a single stage early resolution process across both councils and the NHS and are overseen by local government and social care ombudsmen. The update is really just around full compliance with legislation, alignment with ombudsman expectations and greater consistency with our council-wide feedback processes. There is no change to how we are delivering the statutory process. So there's no change to our timescales and there is no change to the single stage process, which is our statutory responsibility. What we have got is we've strengthened how we respond to complaints, so they're stronger around rights-based, person-centred approaches. And we've got a clear end-to-end process, which is going to be supported by a full standard operating procedures, which is in draft and clarifies defined roles and responsibilities. And although they do align with our corporate processes, because adult social care complaints remain statutory, the policy retains our statutory responsibilities within that. It brings together a more structured approach to investigation, outcomes, remedies and learning and improvement. And I know members will be aware that charging and financial contributions are a common area for complaint. So the policy strengthens how we handle those complaints by improving the quality and consistency of investigations, ensuring decisions and processes are clearly explained and strengthening our focus on how we put things right where we've identified issues. And the idea is to give us better oversight of themes and learning so we can address these recurring issues in our assessments and communication with people.
Thank you very much. Anna.
Just a quick one. I'd written to myself, is this the same as the statutory feedback procedure that we've just had training on as councillors? So, and I'm pleased to see at paragraph 3.2 it does. So I'm just glad to see both of those things are being meshed together. It's a comment really, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you wish to say yes, good spot or something else?
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. So we've taken time to make sure it aligns with the council statutory, is the council feedback process with our statutory responsibilities, and then to strengthen kind of how we're doing that in practice as well. So we'll have a role that will focus on as well how we're learning from complaints and how we're taking that across into our directorate.
Just one thing that I think you may have touched on and I perhaps didn't clock was you said there was a difference between a one-stage complaint process and a two-stage, and I think the feedback process is two-stage, isn't it? Whereas this is a one-stage procedure, and I imagine that makes it quicker. Is that right?
So the idea is that it makes it quicker. It's within the regulation, so it's a statutory requirement that we only have a one-stage process. What the focus is on early resolution, so where we can resolve those without them going into a formal complaint. That's the intention, and then we do a one-stage process, and people can raise a dissatisfaction or go to the ombudsman. But the idea is to resolve those as early as possible to reach the outcomes that people are trying to seek, rather than having to go through a formal complaint process.
That's great. Thank you.
I think I'm correct in saying the phrase vexatious complainant doesn't appear. Is that... Oh, it does. I beg your pardon. Richard says it does. but you're looking puzzled. But there is something equivalent, such as somebody who complains regularly, who has a single point of contact. Is
So
that right?
so we have a communication protocol arrangement, which is across the council with a very specific set of requirements of where somebody would meet that, and how we support them in terms of a single point of contact for raising any ongoing complaints or comments that they have to feedback. That's a council-wide process.
Richard.
I like this. I'm sure our dealing with complaints was pretty good anyway before, but this is an improvement, so I don't want to criticise it. But I really think there's a hole in it, which is about justice for complainants where the complaint is upheld. I'd like to see a section in this that talked about the council's duty to explain to complainants, to apologise to complainants where necessary, to compensate with them where necessary, and to look at the respect that our procedures should have for the complainants as rights holders, and that we seek to uphold and to be uphold high principles of justice and to be accountable to the people that we serve. I think there are strong things that we should say about that. Of course, we're going to get it wrong sometimes, but our complaints policy, everything in this about us learning from complaints is brilliant, because people in the service get that we have to do it, right? And if we don't do it, clearly that's really bad, and that's improved further in this draft. I fully accept and I fully support, but I really think that for individual complainants, we have to show them that they're important to us, that we really do respect our rights. We talk about people-centred services. Where are the complainant-centred bit of this report? And I really think that is missing. And I hope that officers will think about doing further revisions to enable that to be included.
Do you wish to comment?
Sorry, one more thing. I apologise. I didn't read my note. I think I'm really interested in the national debates that have gone on about a duty of candour. And I would love to see a duty of candour in that section as well, so that people can see that we're not ever going to be, or we're going to seek to do the absolute best to avoid cover-ups wherever possible. And that's been a huge issue nationally, and we should listen to that and make sure it's translated into our policies.
Okay, thank you. Do you or Patrick wish to comment on the earlier comment from Richard about apologising and to individuals?
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to do that. So yeah, thank you for your comments. So we have tried really hard to embed the FREDA principles in the policy, which are around fairness, respect, equality, dignity and accountability. So they're within the statutory regulations and adopted by most NHS frameworks. We will make sure that's really clear in the standard operating procedures, and there is something from the Ombudsman about how to apologise, about how to do that sincerely. So we'll be rolling out training to all of our kind of officers about how they do that when they're doing complaints. But I'm happy to take another look at the policy and make sure that's really robust in there.
I think that'd be helpful, because we need to be able to show that we are listening to complaints and where appropriate, taking the relevant action. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree that it's important to be willing to apologise and make other compensation where necessary, where appropriate, if we've made a mistake. I think if there are no consequences for anyone, then it's too easy to get caught in the weeds and make more mistakes. And I just think it sharpens everyone's attention if there are some consequences, by which I'm not saying staff who've made a mistake should be punished or anything like that. I'm just saying that the public, when they're fighting a council or doing a complaint against the council, it can feel like David versus Goliath. And I just think when they are successful and it's proven that they were correct, we need to be decent about that. Thank you.
Okay, can we take that away? But apart from Patrick.
Fran's already said we'll take that away. I think it's important to, one of our aspects is to understand we've got to put ourselves in the shoes of people who are making complaints. People normally don't complain. When they complain, they've considered it, and for somebody to put that into writing, usually in a letter or some form of correspondence, it's important that we give it the consideration that it deserves. And whether we agree or disagree with it, they've felt the need to raise that complaint, and therefore there is a need to apologise because people feel that way. Sometimes it's an error that we've made. Sometimes it's a lack of understanding. Sometimes it's some of the processes and procedures that we have established that we haven't really socialised with people, that we need to then reflect and amend, and that's that period of learning, and that's that feedback to people, so that it doesn't happen for the next time something happens. We have a high number of complaints, which is often around finances and financial assessments, because that's an extremely complex area of work, and for some people, the only time they come against it is when they're going through this process of support from us, and therefore we're asking for evidence and they don't understand it, or we've not explained it properly. So it's important that we recognise and support people through that. And Fran's earlier point was about, it's a way in which we try to mitigate this at the earliest point. We have too many complaints that go to the Ombudsman and are then upheld by the Ombudsman. Well, if they're upheld by the Ombudsman, they should be upheld by us, because all the Ombudsman does is looks at our procedures and our administration of complaint handling and makes recognition. And therefore, it's important that we use that learning, and that's a piece of work that we continue to do, is to make sure, could we have addressed this issue, this complaint, at an earlier point in its process and not had to go through where we've not upheld it. The person then can, which is what their statutory powers are, is to appeal against the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman then looks at it and upholds it. So it's a learning point that we continue to do.
Thank you, Patrick. Lewis.
Yeah, just very quickly. What percentage of complaints relate to charging policy or service delivery or process? Do we know that?
I don't know that off the top of my head and don't have it in front of me because I'm not doing the annual report, but I can find that out and come back to you. I know I've got an item to come to spokes to talk about complaints and that are related to financial complaints in terms of assessment and outcomes for people, so I can bring that as part of that item.
Right, well, if we can find that out as well, that'd be helpful. Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any other hands, so we move to the recommendations. The committee is recommended to scrutinise and approve the amendments to the adult social care statutory complaints policy, which we've done, but we've said we would like some further work doing on giving apologies, and B, delegate authority for approving any further amendments and updates to the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning. Are we happy with those? Yes, thank you very much. So we move, thank you, Fran. Justin, we move on to the finance reports. Item 10 is the first of two finance monitoring reports this month. The outcome for 2025-26, which can be found on pages 103 to 142 of the agenda pack. I must say an excellent outcome. To get within the amount that they have done is extremely good, bearing in mind particularly the situation at the beginning of the financial year. So this report is introduced by Patrick Warren Higgs as the Executive Director for Adults Health and Commissioning. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. So committee receiving two reports today. One is the outturn for the financial year ending 25-26, and we'll also include a note on the adult social care debt at that point. And then we've got one from in-year financial monitoring. And as always, supported by Justine here, and a huge thanks to Justine and the whole finance team who we work extremely closely with throughout the year, which helps us considerably around managing our budgets. So this report is a consolidated management accounts for the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate, and it allows the committee to be aware of and scrutinise the delivery against the business plan and the corporate vision and priorities within it. Into paragraph 3 of the main issues, the overall position for the Adults Health and Commissioning budgets at the end of 25-26 was an overspend of £1,054,000, which is equivalent to 0.3% of our annual budget. and that includes an underspend public health of £952,000, which was transferred to the public health reserve at the year end. As committee can see in the table, the major area of pressure continues to be around the spend within learning disabilities, and that follows on from the ending of the pool budget with the then ICB of Central East, it's Cambridge and Peterborough ICB, at the end of March 2025. The pool budget arrangements was expected to reduce costs. That didn't come to fruition, but work continued throughout the year on joint funded packages of care with proactive actions. We focused on costs of providing that care and support, and we worked hard in order to bring the budget down to the £1 million that you can see at the outturn position. We did work around reducing pressures within right across the service, both adults health and commissioning, and mitigation have been found to offset much of the pressures we've been faced with. In terms of the adult social care debt, the position on adult social care continues to be challenging and presents risks in terms of potential non-payment and the requirement to make risk-assessed provision within the accounts. And you can see within paragraph 3.2.1 that the Adults Health and Commissioning made the contribution of £1 million towards that cost pressure of bad debt provision at the end of the financial year. So that contributed, and that was reflected in our set of accounts. Overdue debt with health partners stood at 2.6 million at the end of March, down from 4.1 at the end of January, which again reflects a huge piece of work that was done throughout the financial year to really bring down the levels of debt that were outstanding, particularly when we decoupled from the Learning Disability Partnership. Happy to take any questions on this particular paper.
Any questions, comments? The Audit and Accounts Committee have been all over the debt position, have they not, Justin? So I wasn't proposing to open that up again unless anybody particularly wants to. Richard?
No, I definitely don't want to raise the debt issue, but I do welcome the report. I thought the question that really jumped out at me was managing vacancies to address the overspend. I would quite like some facts and figures about that. You know, is our turnover increasing or decreasing? How many vacancies have we got? Are we adding on some time period before they can be recruited? Are we deleting posts? There's quite a lot that's possible there that I think we should know as a committee. And so I thought I'd raise it. I don't want to raise the LDP. We've already discussed the health partnership issue. We've discussed that. I think it's well covered in the tax. So I want officers to know it's been read and understood, but I don't think we can constructively add anything just at this stage. And I just put on record again, I think the removal of the housing capital programme that we used to have is a retrograde step, but I've said that in more fully at full council. So I simply ask for it to be noted. So it's really the vacancies question that I'd like to understand.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I potentially need to bring a more detailed paper back for committee to make it available. We could do that through spokes or through committee, but just to say that how we managed throughout the year, the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate at the start of the year had circa £10 million overspend pressure. The council as a whole continued to have some really challenging financial position. So in order to get to a break-even position at the end of the year, there was a need to take some stringent financial decisions throughout the year. Some of that was around the management of our vacancies. And so what we did is we scrutinised every vacancy. We made sure that any vacancies that were up, there was a period where we allowed a 2-month period where vacancies couldn't be recruited to. So that naturally gave you a 2-month slippage on all vacancies. There was exceptions to that where we needed to replace jobs because of the essential criteria or the essential need for that particular role. So there were certain roles that we requested to get those approved to recruit immediately, but most of the roles that we had, we were able to manage with the existing resources and keep those vacant. We didn't delete any roles, but naturally whenever roles become vacant, it's good management business to look at your establishment and see whether or not you need that role or not. So if they've been deleted, they've been deleted because of a management decision. But for my recollection, none have been deleted throughout the year. In terms of turnover, I think at the last look, we were at about 10% turnover within the directorate, which when I joined in June 2023, we had just over 20% turnover. So we've done a huge piece of work around maintaining a stable workforce. We've done a big investment in our apprenticeship program, both in terms of social workers and in terms of OT. So we're helping to maintain a stable workforce. So we've got a real positive around our turnover arrangements. But yeah, it's been a careful management throughout the year to make sure that our statutory duties continue, that we remain focused on our work and our priorities. But we've also had to wear a corporate hat to make sure that we do all our best to contribute to help the council achieve its balanced position at the end of the year. But I can certainly get you more details on the numbers and the actual activity throughout the year. But yeah, there's a whole process that's been adopted, probably been in place for about 2 years now, I think, Justine, which has been our workforce arrangement, so that we're justified to produce business cases for all vacancies, that we allow a breathing space just to enable some recovery of some potential cost associated with it to contribute to the financial savings, and a process of making sure that we do scrutiny on all the roles to make sure that they're still needed.
Okay, any other comments, questions? So if we were to move to the report recommendations, the committee is recommended to note the Adults Health and Commissioning Finance Monitoring Report as at the end of 2025-26, and note the update on adult social care debt. And then there's an action on vacancies, which brings us neat into the next financial year about, well, so where are we with vacancies now, and what are we doing differently, if anything?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of our current in-year position, it remains extremely challenging. We, as you will see from the May report, the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate is in a more favourable position at this moment in time, but it's fairly early on in the year. And as you know, we work within a people-based service, so demands and changes throughout the year may well have an adverse impact on that. So in terms of the council's position, we continue to have those financial controls in place. So we're still doing our workforce panels. We're still scrutinising through business cases vacancies that arise. We're still allowing that 2-month recruitment pause period just to help around the contribution towards the financial position. I think SRMP committee this Thursday will receive the current position as the May, and so you can understand that we at the moment we don't feel we can relax some of these processes. It's good business management in order to keep an oversight and a grip on the areas of spend, one of which being around our own workforce and the recruitment around that. So that's our current position, Chair.
Okay, so that's the current position, but we'll get some more facts and figures about that, Richard. Sorry, let's go back to what we should be doing. So if, Patrick, you wanted to introduce the paper, and then I'll open it up to questions.
Well, happy to, thank you. So committee have got a paper in front of them, which is the report provides an update on the financial position of the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate, including Public Health, at the end of May 2026. So this is for the financial year 2026-27. There isn't a financial monitoring report produced in April, but all of the months you will get a financial monitoring report, and we bring that periodically throughout the year to committee. The overall position for the Adults Health and Commissioning budget at the end of May 2026 is a forecast underspend of 1.956 million, which is equivalent to 0.7% of our annual budget. And you can see the breakdown, which is shown amongst the table, which is at 3.1.1. The forecast underspend is a combination of a net surplus from the budget realignment, which is described in section 3.2, a forecast of over-recovery against the vacancy factor target, and some savings on contracts from a review of commission service, particularly as they come up for renewal and we're considering re-tendering. I won't go into the detail of some of the factors that impact in the in-year position, but You'll be familiar with that from previous finance monitoring reports. Around demand being very difficult to predict. We have some savings targets in year that were approved through the 26-27 business planning. We've got vacant posts, which we have managed, and I've covered that. And then we have pressures that continue within the provider market. A committee had a confidential item last time, which was about the fees and the proposed fee arrangements, but we continue to see how those uplifts land and the way that we work out around new packages that we're sourcing and existing care packages and the fee arrangements associated with that, all of which can have a real driver on our financial position, which we keep a careful grip on. In terms of overdue debt, again, it continues to remain challenging. So we stood at 25.7 million at the end of May, up from 25.6 million at the end of April. And debt over 1 year continues to rise, and that's up from 13 million from 12.5 at the end of April. Just in terms of proposed budget realignments, which is at section 3.2, at the start of each financial year, the care budgets are revisited to reflect the cohort of people using our services at the 1st of April, as opposed to when we established the budget in year 25-26. The results in forecast pressures against some care budgets and surplus against others. In addition, a reassessment has been undertaken of our ability to deliver some savings in the business plan. Following that work, we've got an estimated opening surplus of £993,000, which is proposed to be transferred into the executive director budget, hence why we've got a forecast underspend at the moment. And we've actually proposed that we'll use some of that to address some in-year pressures emerging after being considered for savings in the business plan. So you can see at 3.2.2, there's some detail there around the proposed movement of monies within the policy lines, which will be considered by Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee, but I'm more than happy to take questions on that. In terms of the balance of the adults risk reserve at the start of 26-27, and for committee, the risk reserve has been in place for a number of years. It total 4.6.1 million in 26-27. We hold that there because the market can at times be volatile, and we need to make sure that there is sufficient capacity within the council's reserves arrangement to help respond rapidly to any particular changes. And committee will be aware that the community equipment service and the loss of that provider and shifting from NRS to Mediquip last year meant that we had to call upon those reserves, and that's how we hold it there. We're proposing that we take 1.4 million of that to future spend to invest in particularly in investor safe schemes approved in the recent business plan, and that will then leave an uncommitted balance of 3.21 million, which again we continue to hold in case of the need for responding to any pressures, particularly in the market. The council's home care paper that committee has considered today, there is also a proposal at 3.3.3 about additional investment in order to make sure that is successfully implemented and lands correctly and safely throughout 27-28. So we're asking for a one-off funding of 680,000 from the risk reserves, alongside costs of £128,000 in terms of permanent budget arrangements that will be moved from elsewhere within the commissioning budget. The formal allocation of reserves amounts is a decision for Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee, and they will be considering that at its July meeting. Moving into public health reserves, and Sally's alongside me if you take any questions, but I'll just cover these key points from the paper. The balance of public health reserves at the start of 26-27 were 2.97 million, including 0.95 transferred from public health reserves from the in-year underspend, which was contained in the earlier paper. £28,000 of spend was subsequently being committed within the approval of the Section 151 officer under delegated authority to work specifically on the health impact assessment for Saxon Pit, leaving a balance of 1.1 million. There is proposal to use some of the unallocated public health reserves, and that would represent an investment of £650,000 across 6-7 and into 27-28, leaving an uncommitted balance of £458,000 for any future spend or any contingency of future changes in public health grants or any unexpected costs that may arise throughout the financial year, and the detail of the reserve proposal and planned use is contained within there. The formal allocation, as with the rest of the budget arrangement, will be for Strategy and Resources and Performance Committee. They will consider that in their July meeting this week. happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay. And Robin is going on my behalf on strategy, resources and performance on Thursday while I go to a funeral. Any comments, questions? So all the papers in SRMP, Robin, have already got these numbers in them on the assumption that we vote them through today. Any comments, questions, Richard?
Thanks. I apologise as well if I got confused between the two papers. I think my notes are right, but I hope the questions will be allowed.
I apologise. I rushed through the first one on the basis that I thought that was pretty much the end. We couldn't really debate that other than note it. This one is more significant in that there are changes to budgets that we need to be comfortable with before we move on to SRMP on Thursday.
If we really have reached the end, then perhaps we should just close the meeting and go to the bar. But in all seriousness, it's also early in the financial year, so I think it's good to be informed, but we can't form too stronger conclusions in June about the whole of this financial year. So I would say that my comments are as follows. On the use of the reserve, and that's the area that I'm interested in. Giving £1 million to the executive director budget creeps in there, and Patrick said it in his introduction. I just think as members, that is another highly centralising move in this authority, and I'm not against it. I understand that Michael Hudson and Stephen Moyer want the highest financial rigour, and I think that's proper. But to say that money is transferred to the executive director budget rather than held by the executive director for adult social care, it says something about trust and devolution within the authority. You know, I trust our officers in this committee to be very financially prudent. And so I think that I'm struggling really to support that, even though I like all the people involved. On using some of the adult social care reserve to transition to the new home care contract, that's very sensible, and that's, I think, an important part of what you'll deal with at strategy, resources and performance next week or later in the week. And I think that's a good plan. I think it's good if that's explained to our colleagues, because of course the detail of that they won't be on top of. On the public health reserve, I didn't really understand the background to what was put in the paper on that. But as you know, Chair, I'm very worried about plans to have more substitutions in future years, and the figures seem to be very big in this report about what's planned in relation to that. You and I have spoken privately about that issue, but I would want it to be explained again what are the new decisions that are reflected in this report about use of the public health reserve. And you know, I don't want more substitutions, in truth. Those have been driven up in recent years. I want more public health programmes to be delivered. And I'm worried that hidden away in these papers is the reverse of that.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, do you want to just clarify the reserve element?
I'm looking at Justine. She might come in and help me in that, and I'll probably lean towards Sally to pick up the public health specific questions, Richard. So in terms of the proposal, it kind of is centralisation, but it isn't intended for that. There is a through the rebaselining of the budgets between one financial year and the next, there are some overs and some unders, and fortunately for the directorate, there is a I won't describe it as a surplus, but there is, into the budget realignment, that we have an allocation which we haven't yet seen where we need to place that. So it's held by under a cost centre which is described as the executive director. It's held by me because throughout the year there will be demands on that budget where we'll be able to move it to throughout the year. And so at this point in time, we don't know where those are. There might be in learning disabilities, there might be in older adults, there might be in commissioning, there might be in public health, there might be somewhere else. So they will be used throughout the year. But but accounted for at this moment in time within a particular line within the overall budget of the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate, which is sitting at the Executive Director. We could have placed it somewhere else, but it was shown a major underspend on either LD or in older adults, as you can see from the table contained. So it isn't an attempt to centralise things. It's just almost to be using it as a holding position, because we aren't clear where our cost pressures will be, because they haven't. It's so early in the year where they haven't started to manifest themselves into where we would want them to be. We could have done an exercise to redistribute them now and said there's nothing in the exec director and they're all spread across, but then it would have been a case of moving them around as we see those cost pressures arise throughout the financial year. Justine, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so really it's about getting a clear starting position for each of the care budgets. So if we don't move them to executive director, then we leave them in mental health or LD or wherever, and then we're starting off with a budget that we don't think is what we need for what we've got for the year ahead. So really it's about a tidying up exercise to say, right, this is the people that we know we're supporting at the moment. This is what we think the costs are for the year. Let's get all those budget lines where we think it should be, and then the balance sits somewhere else. Actually, that balance is being reported as an underspend across the directorate at the moment in the forecasts. And it also gets considered for business planning for next year in terms of if we've got surplus budget and there are savings that are needed, then much better take that money that isn't actually needed than sort of having to look at savings elsewhere. So it really is just a tidying up exercise to get the right budgets for the start, so that we're monitoring through the year against the correct cohort of costs that we think will have service type by service type. Do you want me to pick up on public health as well, or do you want?
Let's just get Richard's comments on what you and Patrick have said first, and then we'll go back to Sally, if that's okay.
Everything that's been said is true, and both Patrick and Justine are very loyal to the authority, as they should be. But £1 million that was in adult social care is now with the executive director budgets. And to say that's not centralising, I just don't accept.
Through you, Chair, it's still in our accounts. It's still in our budget. So in table at 3.1.1, it's still contained within that. It's still within the Adults Health and Commissioning budget line. It's just held within. You will see within that table, the top line says Executive Director, which is £14 million. So there are a number of costs, a number of budgets that sit within the scope of what's seen as my responsibility to oversee the overall directorate, which contains that surplus from that rebaselining of £900,000. It's sat within that particular cost centre. It isn't held within a corporate centre. It isn't held anywhere else. It's held within our budget. And how we do is when we get to June's position, which is probably next week, we'll sit down with Justine and we'll have all the service directors will have looked at their spend. We'll sit down and we'll review, and hopefully we're in a favourable underspend position or we break even. But if we're in an overspend position and it's due to particular factors, that might be a time when we decide how to use some of that money that's sitting in the executive director line, but it might be then moved to learning disability, could be going to care and assessment, could go to commissioning. So it would be reallocated during that time. It isn't held anywhere else. It's held within the Adults Health and Commissioning budget.
I think I might have misunderstood, Chair, and if so, I apologise. So I didn't, when it reads Executive Director budget, it means you Executive Director budget. Okay, I misunderstood that, and so I withdraw that earlier comment. Sorry.
I've got Anna, but let's Sally just address Richard's comments about the public health proposals.
Thank you, and Justine may want to come in. So the bit around public health that's included in here is positive around direct use of public health reserves for additional public health programmes of work. So we've gone through a process within the public health team around any additional uplift in our allocation that we had this year and any remaining public health unallocated reserves, and what innovative or new projects we could do with that, or what we want to continue to commit to that's sort of project based rather than big commission programs of work that we're already working on. So we just within the public health team across the consultants in public health, we did a business case proposal process, And these are the projects that we have allocated the additional reserves not additional reserves, sorry, any unallocated reserves that were remaining at the start of the year to work on. So what's outlined in the paper at page 147 is around the allocation of those that are very much public health activities. So the health related behaviour survey in schools is a biannual survey that gives us really good insight into needs within schools, within children and young people, within school settings. It's every other year, so it's difficult to allocate an ongoing budget to it. So it makes sense to use reserves for that, but it gives us good public health insight to be able to direct work. So I want to continue to do that. We also want to commit to doing some more unemployment and health work. We do quite a lot of health work related to employment, but not that long-term unemployment, really difficult to get back into work cohort. So we want to do some more work around that. Looking at quality of life survey, again, gives us really good insight into the population to direct our activity. Mental health is a key priority. Community grants is really important in terms of working collectively across the Poverty Commission and work around that. The school obesity grants is building on previous pilot work that we've done and evaluated really well around giving schools an opportunity to submit proposals for grants to work on obesity specifically in children and young people, which we know is a key growing problem in Cambridgeshire. And then working with the combined authority and the wider work and health priorities, which is looking at NEET cohorts, so those young people that are not in education, employment or training, and how we can help support people back into work, so they're really important public health priorities that we've gone through a business case proposal process within the team to allocate those fundings. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to come in on, Justine.
No, not particularly, but just to clarify, so there are no substitutions in there at all. These are all about new pieces of work that as Sally says, are public health priorities.
That's the answer I wanted. Thank you. Not that I disagree with everything that Sally said, but and I do hope that if there are new substitutions that are proposed, that they will be transparently reported in these reports, because it is an issue that worries me.
Thank you. Anna and Stephen, and then we must wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. I'm infused by some of the new public health work that's coming through, and I think there are some really valuable causes there that need looking at. But there's one thing that I think we're missing, and that is the general slide amongst some groups of society, particularly young men, into drug dealing. Now, I know that this could be called a crime matter and not a public health matter, but I believe it's a public health emergency. And I think it is on multiple levels, because so many young men who we need in society for the good they can bring are slipping down dark tracks which they will struggle to escape from for lots of different reasons, complex reasons. And I wonder if there's any thought to do any work in that regard to try and help people avoid that pathway which is so hard to escape.
That's a good thought, Sally.
Thank you for that comment. So I suppose the challenges in this paper is it's a bit of a snapshot of the work that we're doing in public health, and it's about the allocation of new funds on projects. What we do get is quite a substantial amount of funding for the National Drug Strategy. There's 3 pillars to the National Drug Strategy. The one that we're responsible for is a world-class treatment service. So we receive funding from national team to bolster our drug and alcohol service and to meet the core ambitions of the National Drug Strategy. There's 2 other pillars to that. One's around breaking the supply, and one's about a generational shift, which is around prevention. So we have a partnership program, which is we've got a partnership drug and alcohol board, and then there's also a high harms board that has oversight of all of those 3 pillars. And the high harms board is chaired by the Police and Crime Commissioner. And some of exactly what you just said is picked up through there. So there's not a huge amount of oversight in this group around that work, but it is picked up through other forums. So I value the comments, and I agree it's an ongoing issue.
Okay, thank you. No other comments? So if we move to the recommendations, we're being asked to note the report at the end of May 2026, endorse the proposed requirements to rebalance budgets at the start of 2027, 26-27, and reduce savings targets for difficult to deliver savings as set out in paragraph 3.2.2, subject to the agreement of SR&P. Thirdly, endorse the allocation of £680,000 of adults risk reserves, and D, endorse the allocation of £650,000 of unallocated public health reserves. Are we all comfortable with those recommendations? Well, the fuller versions are in the pack. Yeah, thank you very much. So we'll take that as unanimous. So we have done 2.25 hours. We now need to have, sorry, Sarah, a short comfort break of, say, 15 minutes and restart promptly at 4:30, please. Thank you very much. I think we'll make a start, Sarah, if that's okay. So the next item is the is the risk register for the Adults Health and Commissioning Directorate. This report can be found on pages 173 to 206 of the agenda document pack and is introduced by Sarah Bai, Head of Strategy, Planning and Delivery. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. So this is the first of two monitoring reports this afternoon that I'll be presenting. This one is the Directorate Risk Register, and it's one that comes on a regular 6-monthly basis to committee for you to review. There's currently 11 risks on our Directorate Risk Register. We haven't added any new risks since the last update. And just to highlight that there are 2 risks that are included on our Corporate Risk Register, one around our safeguarding arrangements and one around relationships and governance across the integrated care system. Actions are ongoing against both risks, and they're from the corporate perspective, and they are included in the paper. We continue to regularly review our risk register on a quarterly basis with risk owners from our senior leadership team, and we progress actions and review mitigations against all of the risks, including the ones on the corporate risk register. So the information's in the paper. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has anything they'd like to raise.
Thanks, Sarah. Any comments, questions? No. Okay. Go on, Anna.
Because you're here. Thank you. Risk 11, lack of effective relationships and governance across the integrated care system may lead to poorer coordination and worse outcomes for our population. I mean, that's quite a worry, isn't it? Is that because there's so many moving parts and it's not clear where they're going to land, or is it lack of communication between the various bodies?
I think we initially raised this risk around the changes that were happening in the ICB and the formation of the larger clusters of integrated care boards and what that would mean for the specific relationships in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So the risk was elevated because of that. We're seeing that emerging picture now and understanding a little bit more. So we're continuing to monitor all of that. And that includes working with the ICB on the clarity of their arrangements and their structures. So we're continuing to look at that. We've got lots of pieces of work that are happening around things like neighbourhood health plans and the Better Care Fund, which ensure that we are developing those relationships. So I think this is one where we've got a bit of a watching brief at the moment. I don't think at the moment we could say that anything detrimental has happened, but we wanted to make sure that we were cognizant of the risk and the mitigations that we might need to put in place to ensure that. I don't know, Patrick, if there's anything else you want to add on that one.
Not really, Sarah. Thank you. You covered it excellently. So the only bit I would say is that as Sarah says, we established this when the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough ICB were going through the major change to create a Central East ICB, and we knew we were losing. We'd got some, we'd had some challenging relationships with the current ICB. We wanted to understand the relationship with the newly forming ICB, and we also knew there were a lot of staff who we'd built relationships with who would be leaving and changing, and we weren't clear how that would work. So it was appropriate that we prepared a risk assessment of that. The levels of uncertainty about the likelihood and impact meant that it was rated at a 16, wherefore it went onto the corporate risk register. And you will see that both myself and Martin Purbrick, as the Director of Children's Services, are owners of it, because it wasn't just an adults health and commissioning risk, it sat across the council's risk as well. As Sarah says, there's been some positive movement since some of those changes that were happening within the ICB have settled down. We probably want to review this risk. At the moment, it still feels at the right rating, but we probably just want to review it as we progress, because there are some noticeable improvements around our relationships with individuals in the ICB and some of the work we're doing jointly. So we will continue to review as we do all our risks on this register.
Okay, thank you. And any other comments, questions? David.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at the risks around financial resources and ability to cope, and just thinking about our earlier conversation on the ICB suddenly deciding that they weren't going to do something and dumping it on us. Have we got other instances of those risks in the mix?
I think if we have any risks associated with partners or any other commitments that we may find coming to us, we've probably reflected those in the risk assessments that we've undertaken so far. I'm not aware of any that we aren't cited on that we would need to consider, but we constantly looking at our budgets and our areas of spend and our areas of pressure to reflect, make sure that that risk register is recorded and capturing the actions appropriately. So I don't think at this time there is anything.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. We move to the report recommendation. The committee is recommended to note the updated Adults Health and Commissioning Risk Register, which we have done. No vote is required. Thank you. So hang on there, Sarah, and we move on to item 13, which is the performance report Q4, which can be found on pages 207 to 239 of the document pack. This report is introduced by Patrick. Also available are Sally and Sarah By. Patrick.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So committee will receive this report, which is our Q4 performance report for period 25-26. So it's the 1st of January to March 31st, 2026. The performance management framework is a clear performance process. It links our individual service performance all the way through to strategic decision making to assure committee that we are working to the council's overall ambitions. The most recent data for indicators for this committee can be found in the dashboard Appendix 1. The dashboard includes the following information on strategic key performance indicators, which are current and previous performance, and projected linear trends, previous targets. We have a red, amber and green, so a RAG status, direction for improvement, highlights any changes in performance. We also highlight performance of our statistical neighbours to give you an availability and an oversight to make sure that you can measure against any national indicators, a description of the key performance indicator and any commentary. In terms of section 3, the main issues are that we've got a number of RAG rated performance indicators. 6 of those are rated as red, so that's 26% of our KPIs, and amber is 6 and green are 9. And the detail is contained within section 4. There's one indicator that's been in development and will be added to the dashboard when data is available. That's indicated 014, which is around the percentage of children in 20% most deprived areas achieving a good level of development at ages 2 to 2.5 years. In terms of the current performance for the adult social care services monitored by the committee, the Adult Social Care Survey highlights the social care quality of life score for Cambridgeshire, which has reduced from 19.3 to 19.1 in terms of the 24-25, and these were published in 2025, so they are historical. But that's in line with the reduction seen across our peer neighbours at 19.05 and in England comparators of 19. New contacts for adult social care remains high per 100,000 population, but are lower than the same quarter last year, and that conversion rate to people requiring formal care and support continues to remain low. So that's to assure committee that we continue to have some excellent early intervention and prevention services that are providing interventions and supporting people so they don't need a more longer term arrangement around formal care and support. The number of adults aged 18 to 64 requiring their needs to be met within a residential or nursing setting is reduced in comparison to the previous year, with an end year rate of admission of 10.51 for 25-26 compared to 11.68 for 24-25. That's better than national and statistical comparators, but it's an area that we continue to focus on because what we want to do is support young adults aged of 18 to 64 away from residential care where appropriate, and to support them to give them opportunities to be live in more independent settings and be part of a community. In terms of adults aged 65 plus, Cambridgeshire continues to compare favourably to its statistical neighbours in England overall, with a significantly less people requiring an admission to residential or nursing settings. The rate per 100,000 population has reduced from 545 in 24-25 to 505 in 25-26. That again compares favourably against our statistical neighbours, which is a real positive, because what it means is we're hopefully supporting people more effectively in their own homes or in other settings rather than residential care. Our number of people who received a review, so it's a requirement under the Care Act that people have a review of their care and support needs every 12 months. That continues to be a real challenge because it's a balance between reviews against new assessments, and you can see from the earlier performance indicator that we continue to have a high proportion of people presenting for care and support at our front door. But we've seen a positive movement around a downward trend this quarter, although February and March saw an improvement on previous months. So we continue to be a focus piece of work in there. Removing or reducing risk in safeguarding inquiries has seen a decline in performance, and we've got a piece of work around our practice and standards and quality team working with the safeguarding practice and decision making to ensure that we're as robust as we can be when we're supporting vulnerable adults. The numbers of carers conversations carried out in quarter four is at the highest monthly average for 25-26, and the rate of carers assessed or reviewed per 100,000 continues to improve against that target. Direct payment continues to be a real challenge and remains at around 17%, but we have got a significant piece of work within the Directorate around a range of new guidance and initiatives which have been launched, and we're hopeful that we will see a change in that percentage figure as we progress through the year. And the final one, just to touch on in terms of adult social care, is the percentage of care homes rated good or outstanding by CQC. That's increased at the end of quarter four to 82.1, which is above our target of 80%, and prior three quarters at 81.2%. I won't cover anything further in there. Just to touch on the notification of changes. So some of our adult social care indicators nationally are going through a change in our methodology. This is contained in 4.2, where the proposed methodology changes are driven by a national move to client-level data as the basis for published adult social care metrics. And what that means is we will move from a year-to-date approach to a rolling 12-month period reflecting the national methodology. So committee will see some changes in those, the way that we're presenting that figures. And then in terms of public health, I don't know if Sally wants to just add any further commentary around the public health indicators at 4.3, rather than me speaking to committee about them.
Happy to. So there's just 4 indicators that lost my page. There's just 4 indicators that have been updated, and I think they're probably self-explanatory. And we have talked about, particularly we've talked about falls last time, and there will be a paper giving a bit of a deep dive on falls position and work that's underway in the next committee. And I think the rest of the commentary is pretty self-explanatory and clear. Health checks we have recommissioned and is part of the transition to the new provider. Hence, we've seen a bit of a drop because of lower levels of outreach service provision, but that we are fully expecting that to pick up. But I'm happy to take any questions on any of the others as we go through the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, Anna?
Quick one. I'm really concerned at indicator 013, which is on page 231, which is the percentage of Cambridgeshire care homes rated good or outstanding by the CQC. And over the last 8 quarters, so the last 2 years, it's dropped from 88.3 down to 82.4%. So even at 88.3, that means there were, just under 20% that weren't great, and now we've got even more, and I just wondered what's going on there, and is that there are fewer care homes in toto, or that there are the same number but they've reduced in their performance?
So in terms of the numbers of care homes that we see a change in care homes occasionally, but this isn't. We weren't aware of a significant number of care homes closing, so we would anticipate that this would be a steady state within the care market. This is all care homes. This isn't care homes that we commissioned care with. So there are a number of care homes that we don't commission care from. Some of those may be excellent or outstanding, but some maybe requires improvement. So this is an overall position of all of the care homes rated good or outstanding or adult social care locations across Cambridgeshire. We only commission certain homes depending where people are. In terms of good or outstanding, yes, we continue to be above our target, which is at 80%, and we continue to work with those providers who have got requires improvement, and we work closely with the regulator to ensure that we are addressing those areas that require improvement, because we also have other mechanisms in place that we undertake our own assessment of their care and quality. We have a system called PAMS, which has an oversight of it, and we also have contract monitoring, and our own social workers and teams go into those care settings. But it's not an acceptable place to be, but it's an area that we continue to work on with our providers and support them both through the regulator and directly with them.
Thank you. I appreciate we don't place anybody in care homes that don't need at least good or outstanding, but our residents do. And, you know, I'm just concerned that if people are constrained by funding, you know, we have that. I know it's not our responsibility, but I'm just concerned that that number that meet the CQC standards is dropping. Anyway, it's just a general point, really.
I think I'm right in saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, that the care homes are expected to put the CQC rating on their website. So if somebody looks to see whether or not a care home is good or it's outstanding before they put their loved one in that home, they get a fair idea. And we certainly do not put people to care homes that are not. Yeah. Sorry, any other comments, Mike? Sorry.
Yes, actually, Anna beat me to it. It was on this point, but I'd like to understand the figures here a little bit more. In that it's moved by sort of point something of a percent or by a percent. Just to clarify, that 82.1%, I mean, it doesn't include those that have not been assessed, presumably. It's only those who've been assessed. And it's not those who were assessed in the quarter, it's the snapshot of the quarter of all the homes and how many of them have got this rating. Have I got that right? It's not, I mean, it would, the figures, we only have a handful assessed each quarter, I'd have thought, so the figures would not be that close, I'd have thought. They'd fluctuate much more if that was the case.
So it's the percentage of the homes registered with Care Quality Commission, but it's only those that have been inspected, and it doesn't include those that haven't been inspected, because you could be registered, but until your first inspection, you don't have a rating. So there are a percentage of providers which haven't been rated. This will include all homes that have been rated whenever they've been rated, so not just in the quarter. And we are aware of a significant backlog that CQC have around getting on top of their inspection regimes, which is what they're working for at the moment. So some homes will be rated in here, but haven't been revisited by the Care Quality Commission for some time.
Yeah, thanks. So, okay, that I think is where it is. So I was trying to get in my head how these movements in the figures happen, and presumably it's a lot of homes, that all of them that haven't been rated, and then in the quarter you get a number of inspections, and so if somebody gets a bad inspection, that's going to push that figure one way, and if somebody who was previously badly rated managed to get a good one, it will push it the other way. And presumably the ones who and we would have some homes that we use who are in the requires improvement and inadequate category, but they would only be there because they were inspected after we'd awarded them the contract. We wouldn't award them the contract while they were there. But my comment was going to be, yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if we can ever get it so that we are looking at a higher target on this, because 20% on requires improvement inadequate is, to my mind, not good, because the failures that we see under these seem appalling compared to some of the other things that are monitored in this way, like schools and so on. And yeah, I don't like the idea that we can feel that 20% is ever acceptable, even if it does include ones that we're not using. But yeah, thank you very much. Oh, the other thought I was having on it, of those that are inadequate or requires improvement, have we got a handle on what sort of percentage of that number are ones we use, and how many, all the sort of numbers involved really, of how many there are that we use, and how many there are that are outside the council commissioning system? Thanks.
I might just need to pick up outside of the meeting exactly what you want us to look at on the. I wasn't quite clear what the ask was there. Do you want to understand the numbers of people that we've placed in those homes that have then become RI or inadequate?
Yeah, so we're saying that there aren't any that are RI or inadequate, and they get onto our system. So those that are ours presumably have become RI or inadequate while we've had people placed there.
Or we don't have anybody placed there.
Yeah. Yes, so that's the difference I'm looking for. I'm wondering how many homes we've got which are RI and inadequate, which we're still using and perhaps hoping will improve, and how many there are, how many homes there are, and
we can
the
get
percentage of that that's just out in the system there and are contracted with private individuals. And
we can get that information. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? No. Oh, go on, Darren.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at the indicator 016, another red one, percentage of obese year 6 pupils living in 20% most deprived areas of Cambridgeshire. And you can see from the graph in the appendix that there's quite a long-term trend going in one direction only. It's good to hear that, if you can see down the path to green, Public Health have commissioned child weight management service. I'm just wondering how long that service has been running, and what are the sort of level of interventions that the service does.
Yes, thank you. And I was thinking, after I introduced the performance indicators, that I misquoted, and obesity is actually having a deep dive in September and falls is in December, so I got them the wrong way around. So we will be able to have a more full debate about obesity and actions that we're undertaking in a subsequent committee. But yes, it is a trend in the wrong direction and a worrying trend, and we are doing a lot of work in this space. And obviously there is a national trend as well, and there's a lot of national work in this space as well, and national influences around the increasing rates of obesity. The child weight management service is only really a small part of the puzzle, and there's lots of actions that we need to be doing all at once around child obesity. It's hugely complex, and there isn't just one solution. But the child weight management service is for those children and young people that are already obese, to provide support and education and actions alongside their family, to improve eating habits and knowledge of eating, and as a family looking at ability to eat well, with in mind the cost of healthy food, and give that holistic education and tools to enable better eating. But there are also lots of other actions that we are undertaking around obesity, because that is not the only solution, but it is one tool that we have, and we're able to do that. Other areas, it's not one of our mandatory services, but we've made the decision to continue that service.
Is it a fairly new service, or has it been like running?
It's been running quite a while. It doesn't see, by its nature, it's that sort of, as I said, those children that are already obese, and it doesn't see huge numbers, so it's not going to really shift the tide, but it is one really key important element. And I did mention the grants that we're providing for schools as well around obesity, which is another element. So thinking about the schools as and as part of the Healthy School programme, so a school as a whole kind of system with access to children, young people and families, and what the children are there for a substantial amount of their day, and how that can influence on health and wellbeing as well.
Thank you. It'd be great to learn more about this in future reports as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Robin, I think you mean indicator 8, don't you, rather than risk 8, but whatever.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, risk number 8, percentage of people in receipt of long-term support for more than 12 months that have received a review in the last 12 months. This appears to have been steadily declining away from target over the last 2 years. I just wondered, is that to do with an increase of demand with the same amount of capacity for doing those reviews, or is there some other factor at play? And if so, do we have given the lag of the 12-month review period, do we have a plan in place to plan forward for that?
So yeah, it is around demand. So there was another performance indicator, which is about the number of people who are presenting at I will describe it as our front door, presenting for service requests, and the difficult balance we have with the teams that both have to support new people presenting and those people who are in receipt of services. And often the risk is a judgment on risk, and risk often comes with the people who are presenting because they're not receiving any services. So that's where a target of our direction goes. That then has an implication on the number of people with reviews. What we've done historically is we've had some available funds, we've tended to invest in a review program to make sure that we keep on top of that piece of work, and that stopped about 2 years ago, so that was probably keeping the levels up at a higher place. So there's a piece of work at the moment which we're doing, which we're describing as capacity and demand. That's being led by some of the senior team in the directorate, which is looking at where our demand's coming in, where our current pressures are, what our current workforce looks like. We're fortunate, as I spoke earlier, that we haven't got the levels of turnover, so our vacancy rate is lower and our turnover rate's lower as well. So that means that we've got a steady arrangement within our workforce, but it's just about how do we make sure that that workforce is working most effectively and efficiently to be able to both meet with the demand coming through for service requests, as well as the demand that we have around undertaking reviews of our services that are currently in place.
Can I ask a follow-up? If given that we've now seen this trend of a decline, if it's more about trying to find the capacity to handle incoming versus existing, is that not an indicator that we need to increase the capacity that we have? If there's a greater amount of people coming in this year than there was last year, then we know that in a year's time they're also going to need a review. So can we plan for that and increase capacity?
Well, we can do, but given the current financial position of the council, it's about how do we balance the finances that we've got available against the demands that we've got. So we haven't been able to identify an investment in additional resources to help us to meet that level of demand. What we have to do is work with the resources that we've got to make sure that they're being supported effectively and as efficiently as possible. So we're looking at things from digital solutions to support staff to enable other kind of procedures and processes to be much more efficient and effective, which gives them freeing up of time in order to do reviews. We don't want to suggest going into reviews, which some councils do, which is done on telephones, because that's not an effective way of reviewing. It gets your performance up, but what it doesn't do is it isn't a good outcome for people, because you want to be sure that you're having a face-to-face visit and you're able to sit down and talk to the person. But there are different ways in which we can do it. And as I say, we're looking at our capacity and demand as a whole, directorate, so we're able to understand where we can move resources around and how we can support teams more effectively to undertake the review. So that's where our first kind of driver is about what can we do and maximise the outputs and the work of our current teams in the ways that we can support them more effectively.
Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Which sort of brings on to my question. In the next quarter, we'll get the new performance targets. What I wouldn't want to see was, in order that we're much better at, or apparently much better at achieving this, we arbitrarily reduce the target from 75% to 55%, and then we're marginally above it. If things are the same, then the target should be the same, in my opinion, and it will be something which we would need to, as a committee, look out for next time.
I'll just come back on that if that's okay, Chair. So the target was set around the time that we did have that additional capacity. So I think we do have to ensure that we are realistic in terms of what we're able to achieve. We're looking at all of those indicators, looking at our performance over the last couple of years, plus where regional and nationally the benchmarking is. But what we want to do is make sure there's still a stretch target in there. So we want to continue to improve. So it might not be that we're setting it so high that it is unachievable from our current position, but that actually it continues to stretch and we do improve that trend rather than see it continue to go downwards. So it's one of the things that we will bring back in Q1. We're just having those conversations at the moment, looking at the benchmarking and the national trends as well as our local trends as well.
Okay, well, stretch targets sound grand. Arbitrarily reducing them in order that we can be seen to be meeting them is probably not so good, in my opinion. But we'll look at those more carefully in next time you report back. So we move to the report recommendation. The committee is asked to scrutinise and comment on the performance information presented, which we have done. No vote is required. Thank you very much. We move on to the final item of business for this afternoon, which is item 10, the committee's agenda plan, training plan, and committee appointments. This can be found on pages 241 to 258 of the agenda pack. Would the Democratic Services Officer let us know of any changes to the committee agenda plan since publication? Rishinda.
Thank you, Chair. There's just one change to report. Extra care housing contract extensions has been removed from the September meeting following review of the end dates of the existing contracts. It will be brought back at a later date.
And the reason for removing it, remind us, Patrick?
It's just about the timeline that the commissioning officers are working to. They don't feel confident that they will have a suitable position to be able to report to committee in September. So they've gone away to just revisit the timeline and make sure that it comes to a future committee where they're able to bring a paper with a proposal for committee to consider for decision.
Any comments, questions on the agenda plan? No, thank you. Next is the committee training plan. Are there any comments or questions on this? No, I would just, as my usual plea, encouraging you all to attend the training and the development opportunities that are provided. Turning to the appointments made by this committee, we're asked to review the appointments to outside bodies in Appendix 3. The existing appointees are all listed. Are there any comments or questions about these appointments? No. Finally, we're asked to review the appointments to internal advisory groups and panels set out in Appendix 4. Are there any comments or questions about these appointments? No, thank you. So we move to the report recommendations, and the committee is recommended to review its agenda plan, review its training plan, review the appointments to outside bodies, and review the appointments to internal advisory groups and panels, which we have done. No vote is required. That brings us to the end of today's business. Thank you very much for your attention and contributions today. We'll meet next at 10 o'clock in the morning on the 17th of September. I will declare this meeting closed. Thank you, everybody.